Thank you very much, Alison. I won't try to rebut what you said. I apologize for not having been present yesterday to welcome you and moderate your visit to the Naipaul House, but I understand it was a highly successful initiation. It is in the nature of things Caribbean that the Diasporic Literary Archives Project knows that it will take distinctive shape from our ongoing project of gathering together the lost literature of the West Indies. I mean, a lot of our primary texts are still out there at large, not at large, but hidden away in the newspapers for the last 300 years, in magazines that have disappeared, etc. So we are still collecting the primary texts, and that's an important project. And I don't know where we're going to get the money, but those newspapers have to be digitized so that people can take their time and go through them and pull the material out. And the Diasporic project here on Literary Archives is also going to be quite distinctive because it cannot avoid responding to something that is remarkable and unique here: the interconnections between the visual, the oral, the written, song, story, calypso. You just can't take them separately, but for convenience you have to. But while you're doing them, those connections keep pressing in on you. So I am excited by this project because it really is going to make its own rules and be quite distinctive. There's a strong note of personal reminiscence in my presentation, but my main purpose is to describe the problems, the pleasures, the methods, and the exciting luck and the chance involved in the acquisition of authors' manuscripts, letters, and other documents in the Stone Age. The manuscripts, letters, and other documents, henceforth, when I say manuscripts, I mean all of them. By Stone Age, I mean just 50 years ago, when West Indian literature had not yet become an academic discipline and was only just getting into the syllabus of the University of the West Indies, a time when few authors understood that their manuscripts could be sold to anybody, a time when few institutions in the region had a policy of gathering in by whatever means the books and papers of writers, and a time when the main scholarly network for West Indian literary studies existed only through the Association for Commonwealth Literary and Language Studies. In these circumstances, the intervention of private individuals having access to and contact with writers and amateur book collectors was crucial. The main differences between the Stone Age and now are obvious enough, but we may have to spend some time taking into account the fact that more and more authors compose on the computer, and many authors' changes are floating around somewhere in cyberspace and not available for scholarly examination. Is it possible that the acquisition, preservation, and making accessible of authors' manuscripts will become more and more a project aimed at the writings of the past? Where will our project be when the only manuscript, if it may be so called, is the perfect updated electronic copy? As I implied at the beginning, it's not my brief to think about these concerns. My presentation arises from certain accidental coincidings of persons, places, and times. I happen to have been involved as an unpaid literary agent in the earliest attempts by the University of the West Indies to acquire authors' manuscripts and other papers. And as part of that, in the unending struggle to get acquisition to be taken on board as a necessary policy with a statutory vote in the annual budget. I mean, we still haven't got there. That by policy a university says we've set aside so many $100,000 for the purchase of manuscripts so that you don't have to go and beg the vice chancellor or beg the principal or beg the librarian to cough up funds. You know there's a fund. We still haven't got there. Now, the acquisition of West Indian authors' manuscripts by West Indian institutions is necessary for a number of reasons. Firstly, and obviously, for the study of and research into West Indian literature. Secondly, for the general development of our universities as institutions for research and higher learning. Thirdly, as a site for what we might call academic tourism, the places where academics and students from outside the region would come if they have a living interest in our literature. And fourthly, for nationalistic reasons, since these manuscripts are part of our cultural heritage, the tangible heritage that awakens the intangible ones, and should properly be housed here, placing upon us the responsibility to take care of them, to drool over them, and of course, to make them accessible for study to our scholars and students, as well as to scholars and students from all over the world. When we think of persons using authors' manuscripts, we tend to think in terms of comparing the whole manuscript with the published text. But there can be satisfying brief encounters if you go to a certain place in the manuscript because in your reading of the published text, your intuition tells you, make a check. So it's nice to have the manuscripts in hand. You read them and say, oh, there's something funny here. I go to the manuscript and check that thing. It doesn't take me a lifetime. I don't have to get bossy back doing it. It's just go in and check it and come back out. Another large interest, not requiring a microscope, is the comparative light thrown on the creative process itself by something I'm particularly interested in, an understanding of the differences between a poet's revisions and a novelist's revisions. And I might add that for teaching purposes, you may select a set of authors' revisions that can open up particular books and open up minds about what goes on in writing. I'm really saying here that manuscripts can help us to be better teachers. Freshly arrived at the Mona campus, 2 or 3 years after the UWI had been bullied by telegram into purchasing for £750 the manuscript of Wilson Harris's The Secret Ladder, I was taken aside by a senior official. I realized after a while that for 2 or 3 years, he had been savoring his question as a punchline to knock me out with. Tell me, he said, me did always want to know, if you have the book already, is why you must spend so much money on the manuscript. I was well into my Wallace Hildick word-for-word stuff before I realized he really didn't want to know. And many people don't really want to know. It would be a valuable addition to this project to promote or carry out workshops in campus territories, illustrating the value of authors' manuscripts in helping us to appreciate the published text. The kind of unawareness that made bold to accost me in Jamaica has not passed. And let me ride my hobby horse a little bit here. It has gone on to manifest in less innocuous ways. People in the graduate schools these days are not famous for being interested in reading literary manuscripts. And it's quite the fashion among the clever ones to be suspicious even of the text and see as more significant the things that the poor conditioned author did not say. Is it too much to hope that examining authors' manuscripts would give direction to the enterprise of deconstruction by providing evidence-based information that authors actually make choices not only about what to say, but also about what not to say, about what to see and what not to see? These are not accidents. Writers make deliberate choices over some of their omissions. So you can't go and pound them for the omission as if they were just stupid, naive people who were conditioned by the world around them not to be aware. The manuscripts and collections in whose acquisition I participated may be looked at in two groups. I don't plan to speak about all of them, but I want to list a number of factors that operated in most of the cases, and these should be stated for comparison with the present and for helping to devise a way forward. Firstly, all the papers relate to authors one admired or was working on. Secondly, the enthusiasm was shared in some cases by excited graduate students. Thirdly, the connections between author, owners of the papers, and interested parties were or became very personal. Fourthly, the people interested in the manuscripts and the owners or custodians of the manuscripts in those days shared a nationalistic outlook that mattered more than the commercial prospects. Finally, in those days, the overseas competition was not competing for everything. Their interest was usually an interest in major writers or major books from their point of view. That was all these rules apply to that period. So let us have a look at the first of the two groups of manuscripts. The group I call Group A, the manuscript of Wilson Harris's The Secret Ladder around 1965, the papers of Roger Mays around 1966, and Michael Anthony's The Year in San Fernando around 1966. All of these were acquired by the Mona Library in Jamaica. And they were acquired during years when I was stationed in Edinburgh, working on what at that time was an unlikely PhD dissertation on the West Indian novel. I had no official connection with the UWI. I'm trying to say that the responsibility of gathering in the manuscripts is almost a public responsibility. Anybody who knows or hears about a manuscript should draw it to the attention of the authorities. And the country is small enough for us to depend on that kind of community network. The Wilson Harris manuscript. On one of my visits to London, Wilson Harris told me that the manuscript of his first novel, Palace of the Peacock, had gone to a critic that he knew. He confirmed that he had the secret ladder. I was working on this book at that time. He hadn't thought about selling manuscripts. He didn't have the impression that the UE would be interested. He said, go ahead, I could offer it to them at £750. The reply from the UE was that the purchasing of authors' manuscripts was not yet a concern. I sent a telegram to the Vice Chancellor, Sir Philip Sherlock, who didn't know me. In those days, I have to let you know, I was on the side of the Cuban Revolution. And perhaps that is why the telegram ended with a warning to this respected figure that if the manuscript was not bought, history would not absolve him. Professor Sherlock was a man who cared and a man who knew about the arts, and I'm sure my youthful threat would only have amused him. But he did have second thoughts. The manuscript was bought. Thus did the UE make its first venture into the manuscript market. How we acquired the Roger Mays papers is also very useful. The Mays acquisition did not begin with manuscripts in mind. And the story illustrates how far enthusiasm can carry you and the part that luck plays in these matters. I was working on my Roger Mays chapter and kept being irritated that the books were out of print. And all I could do was use the university's copies in the university reading room where you couldn't put up your foot or loll about. Now, for the couple of years before, I had been harassing publishers to go into their archives and see if they had manuscripts of the writers, because I wanted to see and measure the extent to which West Indian writers in the early days were virtually obliged to make changes in content, changes in form, and changes in language to suit the British market and to satisfy the demands of the publishers, who after all had to sell books to a British public. So it got into my head that I should write to Jonathan Cape. And I wrote them very pompously on Edinburgh University letterhead that the books were out of print and were in demand, and could they please do a 3-in-1 edition since the works were short. Boldface. Mr. Glenn Howard wrote back, ironically I think, but in those days I didn't respond. Even now I don't respond to irony. If you want to be nasty and ironic, I'll pretend you're honest and that you mean what you say. Mr. Glenn Howard wrote back, ironically I think, saying that if the edition were underwritten, they would do the 3-in-1. Telling me, well, if you want us to reprint it, pay for it. I now realize that's what you were saying. Maybe not. I was so bent on doing the editing and the introduction to this 3-in-1 edition that I decided to write to Sangster's bookstores in Jamaica and invite them to underwrite the edition. And just so, they said yes. The introduction was done quite appropriately by Mr. Norman Manley. But by this time, I was in correspondence with Roger Mays' sister, Jessie Days, who was in charge of her late brother's estate, and she was the one who was granting permissions. She was pleased with developments, would be happy to see the manuscripts go to the UWI, and gave her blessings to the preparation of a collection of Mays' short stories coming out of the manuscripts. I wasn't on the ground in Jamaica, but Mr. Bill Carr, A keen Englishman in the English department took up the fight, I believe with the help of novelist John Hearn, friend and associate of Roger Mays. With such forces at work, it was a foregone conclusion that the university would buy those manuscripts. With the Harris and Mays manuscripts in the bag, UB did not balk at acquiring the Michael Anthony. But now I have a problem with that. As a die-hard Federalist, and I can be excused, as a die-hard Federalist, all I wanted was that the manuscripts should be at the University of the West Indies. But now, I'm thinking a little bit differently. Just as I believe West Indian manuscripts should stay at home in the West Indies, so I also hold that the manuscripts of a particular author should rest in the island from which the author comes. And I don't know if the three campuses can be persuaded to carry out the necessary repatriations. I know I can't think of a better place to be in than Guyana when looking at a Wilson Harris or Roy Heath manuscript. And if I have to work on a Selvan manuscript, I feel I will get a lot more out of it if I was in Trinidad at the UWI here working on that manuscript. So not only do I want the West Indian manuscripts to be in the West Indies, I even want the Trinidad ones to be in Trinidad, etc., etc., etc. The case is probably stronger with respect to the earlier authors whose works are usually located or influenced by their particular island. And I think we would need to confer with the later writers based in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, and with the scholars immersed in their work before we can decide what is the best place for the manuscripts. Some of these writers live in specific places and imaginary homelands at the same time. So it might be quite problematic deciding where the manuscript should be housed. I know that if I had the power, I would decree that the collections of certain authors are national treasures, and if they are to be sold to other countries, the author who is subject to our tax laws and who may get a waiver, the author who is subject to our tax laws must supply a verified and high-resolution digital copy of the entire collection to the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And we would strongly advise the author to get the buyer to provide that digital copy. So if they want, I prefer the things shouldn't go. But if they have to go, then the buyer should be obliged to provide a digital. I can't prevent a writer from making money. He has to earn his livelihood. But I think we can legislate in a way that a digital copy is obligatory. So all of this was Mona campus while I was in Scotland. The papers in Group B are all connected with writers from Trinidad and Tobago, and they're all housed in Trinidad. Once again, action came from interest in the particular writers and work with graduate students. The papers I got involved with were the papers of Eric Roach. Mrs. Iris Roach didn't know that people used to sell manuscripts, and she was very suspicious. And took a little time, to tame her down and get us to understand, yes. And when we brought out the poems of Eric Roach, she was more than glad to say, well, okay, I'm willing to sell. the papers of Earl Lovelace, we had a torrid time with that because the bureaucrats spent years trying to work out whether it should be bought and at what price. And you know Earl is a man who could get vexed very quick, but Earl never lost his patience. He had a kind of political commitment that his manuscripts should be in Trinidad. And he had a kind of a sense of entitlement that he was entitled to have his manuscripts kept in Trinidad. Thank God for that, or else we would have lost it. Same thing happened with the papers of Michael Anthony. And we had a very easy thing with the papers of Dennis Mahabir, who used to be a mayor of Port of Spain, who wrote a novel, but who edited one of the Indian newspapers of the 1930s and 40s. And I had a student, Dr. Kenneth Ramchand, who was working on a PhD on newspapers, magazines, etc., by people of Indian origin, written in English between the middle of the 19th century right up to the middle of the 20th century. A kind of literary activity that eventually ended up with C. Prasad Naipaul, Trinidad journalist. And Chris has written a book based on the thesis called Finding a Place. And one of the persons who had been editing newspapers was Mr. Dennis Mahabir, but he was dead. And then by accident one day I met a fellow who told me he was Dennis Mahabir's brother, and how Dennis left a lot of stuff in the house and I could come and see it. So we went there and found many of the back numbers of the papers, little short stories he wrote, and so on and so on. And we persuaded him to sell them to the University of the West Indies. But I just want to finish off, and we could take discussions afterwards, with the papers of Sam Selvon. But Sam is a fellow, drunk or sober, he was generous. He was sober at this time, and he said to me sometime in 1988, all those box of papers in the house, and the woman wanted me to move the rubbish. He told me, I always have rubbish. Why don't come and take the blast sitting? I said, for what? He said, giving it to you. Take it for yourself. I said, no, well, I don't want it for myself. He said, well, what do we? You want me to do? I said, well, I don't know. But I got in touch with Professor Max Richards, who was the principal at the UWI. I asked him, well, could you pay my passage to go to Canada and give me subsistence for 2 weeks while I go over Sam Selvon's manuscripts? And the deal is, you'd pay for me to bring them back, and the UWI would have them. That was the basic deal. Professor Richards said, okay, go ahead. Went up there, and it really was one of the most moving episodes in my career. Sam had always been saying that his wife, of My Girl and the City fame, if you know that short story, you could see how much he loved her. Because Althea was is the girl in the city. But the Sibolis telling, why don't you get a real job? And why are you lugging all that old people from London to Canada? So when he moved from London to Canada, she said, well, leave it here and leave it. And he didn't leave it. So anyway, when I went there and encamped in the room where all the stuff was, the children began coming in from time to time. Like, Ken, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And I realized that they didn't know that their father was a famous writer. And I had seen little signs of rebelliousness towards him, thing. But they started coming in and I giving them short stories, showed them clippings, and over the 2 weeks, I really saw those children grow in appreciation and respect for their father. And by the time I was leaving, something else happened. Sam came and woke me up. I said, it's about 3 in the morning. I said, what happened, Sam? Althea says she can't sleep. Why can't Althea sleep? Because I am taking away her and the children's legacy. What? Well, I was so glad to hear that. And I knew I could talk fast and I could talk her out of her depression. But so we persuaded her that the contract doesn't alienate the stuff. It's still hers. She has complete control of it. Anytime they want to come, they could come. If any books are published out of it, the proceeds would go to them. And as I said, we left all wonderful friends at the end of it, and I was happy about what had happened within the family. And in the end, I persuaded Professor Richards to bring them all out to Trinidad, pay their tickets for a 3-month holiday, and put them up in university accommodation. But there's always spoilers. A lot of business people decided they would give me money, agreed that they would give me money for his food and so on. But all of them backed out at the end. But still, that's how these things go. It was a happy time. So those are some of the ways in which we operated in those days. And as I said, I found it very exciting, stimulating. It was amateurish, but there was a kind of fanaticism or enthusiasm that made up for the absence of a professional framework. And of the Derek Walcott collection, I must say that we started off very modestly with the illustrations and set drawings for the Joker of Seville in, I think, 1983. After that, we got 2 more purchases. But by then, the field was getting hot, and we really were not in the running at all for the bulk of the Walcott collection, which went to the University of Toronto in 1999. So the issue of split collections has arisen in the case of Walcott, but it exists with many others, and that's something we have to think about. And the issue of alienated collections, as you know, exists in the case of Vidya Naipaul. What do we do about the split collections and the alienated collections? I just want to say something about the Roach manuscript. To end with that, but I can't say it and have it recorded, so I wonder if could stop recording. It's a good joke for the end of the thing, So is it off? Are you not recording?